So a little bit by way of introduction / by way of sales pitch. And I'm going to put that right up there. I want to sort of consider why being intentional with our teaching has value to us. What are the benefits we receive from being able to be very deliberate in our approach to educating our students? And some are self-explanatory, and some maybe aren't quite as obvious. So, at some level, I think it's to our detriment that we have very often, in an expeditionary context, 30 days with our students, or 90 days with our students. Because having a huge window of time for our students allows us to be somewhat sloppy and somewhat careless in the way that we approach our teaching. That's not universally true. But one of the reasons that it's really critical for us to be very deliberate in the way that we try and teach our students and be really tight in our time management is that by being an effective, well-managed educator, we create time that allows us to provide our students with the experiences that we want them to remember from our courses. And I think sometimes education or teaching gets a bad rap. It's kind of like the necessary evil that then allows us to go climb peaks or paddle rivers or go caving. It's like, we got to get through all the classes so we can do the really cool stuff. Whereas, first of all, it's fundamental that we teach students the skills to be able to do the activities. But the more deliberate and intentional we can be with our messaging, the more time we create for those pinnacle experiences that our students walk away and tell all their friends about. So certainly one of the things that we can see as a benefit is that effective and intentional and succinct education creates time and allows us to do a lot of other activities that we want to have our students experience on these courses. I think that one of the things that we can see is that by the time most of us get to being in a position where we're leading other people in the outdoors or we're teaching in a classroom setting, we've got some level of basic competency at what we do. We probably bring to the table a fair amount of experience. And a lot of the reasons that our students really enjoy spending time with us is that they sort of look at our experience and think, we're pretty amazing, we're pretty cool people, I want to be just like my instructor. We can rely on that kind of cool factor of who we are, and that can allow us to slip a little bit in being deliberate in our education. And we can sort of have this tendency to wing things, and we get away with it, especially when we have audiences that are not quite as sophisticated as some of the audiences you may later encounter in your careers. So one of the concepts that we're going to really hit on today is this idea that though we're pretty good at what we do, that instinctual nature of how to facilitate experiences or how to teach people information can be made much more effective if we shift from being instinctual in what we do to very intentional in what we do. And we're going to use those vocabulary words multiple times as we go through the day. So we want to change from being instinctual to intentional in our education. All right. I believe very strongly that our ability to educate effectively enhances student performance. And some of that's pretty obvious. If you want to teach somebody how to tie a water knot, and you do a poor job with your demonstration, you don't set up your classroom well, the students can't see what you're doing, you're too far away, we know that students have a hard time replicating that skill. You can magnify that concept to whatever topic you're teaching, but if you want high-performing students, you need to teach them effectively, or they will flail about until through direct experience they eventually get to the place you wanted them to be. But you really increase that process of learning by being very good at what you do in terms of your teaching. How many of you were at Jim Sidthorpe's presentation this morning? Okay, most of you. There was one slide where he had a pie chart, and he was dissecting what it was that students said they learned from their instructors on their courses. And there were a lot of little slices of that pie. But one of those chunks that was nearly 30% of what students said they learned from their instructors was direct exchange of curricular information. So almost a third of what the students say they're gaining is what their instructors teach them through direct exchange of curriculum. All right? And so that feeds back into this idea that we can really influence not only student performance in the field, but retention of information and utilization after their experiences at NOLS by being really good at how we teach their students, not just letting them have an experience that utilizes that information. And finally, I'd put out there this idea. Precision of language equals precision of thought. This is going to be the core topic that we're going to explore today. My ability to use language precisely and effectively indicates that I actually have clarity of thought about what it is that I'm trying to convey. That should be intuitive to people. But there's often a huge mismatch in the fact that I may, in my own brain, understand exactly what I intend to say and what I mean, but it doesn't come out in a language structure that allows my students to actually absorb that information. And very often there's a disconnect on both ends. And the fact is that I actually don't have a very clear precision of thought about what it is I'm trying to convey. And as a result, what comes out is sort of a rambling, jumbling approach to a set of information. And that results in deteriorated student performance and taking longer for them to actually achieve competence in whatever it is you're trying to teach them. So it's kind of my sales pitch. Like, those are the hallmarks for me of why I spend a lot of time thinking about exactly how I'm going to approach delivering an educational topic so that I have predictable student performance outcomes that allow me to go on and have formative experiences for my students.
So one of the activities that we have our instructional staff do during the instructor training course for WMI, and one of the, here's a hint for you, one of the questions that I ask of people who interview to teach for WMI is to take a complex topic and distill it into 3 sentences. And I would argue that you ought to be able to teach any topic in only 3 sentences. If you're able to do this, it means that you have not just gained that subconscious mastery that we have for years held up as the pinnacle of our evolution, but it actually means you've moved to what I would argue is truly the pinnacle, the next level up, and that's reflective mastery. Not only do you do things automatically, you can sit back and think about exactly what you did to make something smooth. So if you're ever going to be in a phone interview with me, remember, I'm going to ask you to teach something in 3 sentences. People often turn around and go, oh yeah, well, you can't do that for super complex things. There's no way. And I think that you can. So how many folks are familiar with diabetes as an example, just as a topic in general? You've taken a medicine course somewhere. Complex topic, true? You can go to med school. So that's another, 4 years after your college career. You can then become an endocrinologist for another 3 or 4 years of residency, and you can focus on diabetes, study it forever. I would argue you can teach anything you need to know about diabetes in 3 sentences. I would say if I had to teach diabetes in 3 sentences, sentence number 1, it's a complex problem that involves challenges processing carbohydrates in somebody's body. Sentence number 2, people who have diabetes can have issues that run the gamut from not having enough sugar in their system to not being able to access whatever sugar is in their system. Sentence number 3, the acute problem that could become a possible life threat has to do with not having enough sugar and can be treated by providing sugar and evacuating to medical care. Period. End of class. 1, 2, and 3. Simple enough explanation of diabetes for you?
That's actually better than what you usually teach in EMT, I think.
I agree. I agree. And you know why? Because when I have more time, I decide I need to fill it. And I lose sight of what truly matters. And I think that's the challenge for us as educators. We need to come back to what truly matters. That in any given topic, there ought to be just 3 core pieces of information that really make the difference. If I'm trying to look at a topic and I come up with 7 or 8, the topic is too complex. I need to break it into smaller sections. There's been plenty of data done on how much information people can juggle in their mind at any given time. Does anybody know what that magic number is? It's 7, yeah. That's why we have phone numbers were generated as 7 digits way back when they started doing that. Why flood people? If we're not going to be able to remember more than 7, let's prioritize it to 3. People can remember 3. And if it's taking me more than that, break it down, make it multiple sections so that people can then come back to master the smaller subsets. And that's what we're going to ask you to do right now. We're going to start simple, and then we'll gradually increase the challenge because that's what makes it most fun. So here's what let's do. We'll divide up into little groups. And for this side of the room, we'll say this row, this row, this row. First 3 rows can each be groups. And then maybe we get 5-ish, 4 or 5-ish, 2 teams back in here. And then maybe a back row, and then some combination of these 2 rows here. So we've got groups of 5-ish or 6-ish. And we're going to give you 5 minutes. The clock on the wall says that it's 1:47 right now. So at 1:52, your first assignment is to come up with your 3-sentence class on campsite selection. Your 3-sentence class on campsite selection. You may begin.
We don't need to. There are only 3, so we don't need 3.
That's a point.
Let's go around the room, and we will hear our 3 sentences from each team. And what I challenge you to do, encourage you to do, is as you hear these 3 sentences, think about what the underlying themes are behind each of these sentences and put them in the context of, are they widely applicable at this point? Could they apply to any campsite selection? And we'll hear, I bet you what we're going to hear, some pretty similar sentences group by group. So we'll start with that, and then we'll build on it. So we'll begin up with what? Team Semicolon. What did you come up with?
Same thing.
No, but great. All right, so
Last minute coaching.
a good campsite is safe from objective hazards like falling rocks, lightning, or rising water. A good campsite observes L&T principles such as camping on durable surfaces, away from water sources, and it doesn't disturb wildlife. A good campsite is comfortable and convenient, and is flat, spacious, and protects your equipment.
Okay. All right, let's start hearing where the trends pick up or diverge. What do you guys have over here?
When choosing a campsite, look up, down, and around for hazards, including but not limited to falling objects.
And
I actually just added that in. That wasn't
escaping chasms in the earth.
Consider durable surfaces, proximity to water, and impact on other visitors. Your campsite is your home. It should be flat and accommodate your entire group.
Okay. All right, let's just keep circling around the room. What you guys have?
We would like to find a durable, comfortable, and safe campsite that minimizes our impact on land and other visitors. These concepts vary depending on distance to water, terrain, permit requirements, and local ecosystems. Basically, seek a flat, durable surface away from water drainages, falling objects, and exposure to the Basically, seek a flat, durable surface away from environmental hazards such as water drainages, falling objects, and exposure to the elements.
Okay, excellent. What do we have back here?
Okay, so we have choose a site that is safe for you, choose a site that is safe for gear, and choose a site that is safe for the environment.
Sounds very familiar to a team over here. What do you guys have in the back there?
Choose a site that minimizes exposure to potential hazards, takes L&T into consideration, and is comfortable.
All right. That is, it's one sentence with 3 thoughts in it. Very good. I like it. What do you guys have?
Ours basically says, first consider recognizing and mitigating risks of objective hazards, such as widowmakers, floods, bears, and lightning. Second consideration is for environmental concerns, such as surface durability, closest to water. And third, how is the campsite location going to affect our ability to use our equipment?
Okay, very good. And then our team here?
They're a little more wordy. In order to create a safe and enjoyable campsite, select a location removed from environmental hazards. It is important to follow L&T principles, specifically camping on durable surfaces, access to and distance from water, and respecting other visitors. Having appropriate spaces and surfaces for the entire group to camp and cook will maximize your experience and minimize your impact.
All right. So listening to whatever we just had, 21 sentences or something like that on campsite selection, I boil it down to, I think, 3 concepts that I heard in some capacity from every group. That could even be fewer than 3 sentences, but I heard if you're selecting a campsite, consider safety, consider impact, and consider comfort. So I can boil it down to 3 words: safety, impact, and comfort. And that right there is the core for my campsite selection class. Can we all agree that that's a reasonable core to have? We got there by doing a couple of things that I think a lot of us did without thinking about. So now we're going to think about it, hence teaching with intention. We started with whatever was close to us. I had the folks who were the sea kayakers saying, well, you can't say that it's got to be on flat ground. I sea kayak in Prince William Sound. There is no such thing. I heard people say, well, you need to find a campsite. You can't make a campsite. And the mountaineers would say, I disagree entirely. I make my campsites wherever I choose. And we started eliminating stuff to get to the core components. Really, what I would argue are the curricular message points of campsite selection. But then we had this moment where I said, yeah, it doesn't really matter the environment in which I'm teaching campsite selection, so long as I know what those key points are. And so now we do what we refer to as we back plan. Once I know the core components of my class, I can figure out who my target audience is, what the end use of this knowledge is, and what makes the most sense for a stylistic approach to that teaching. So the 3-sentence class I gave you earlier on diabetes, I think Dave said, that was a great EMT class, delivered in 3 sentences. Awesome. That's an entirely inappropriate 3-sentence class for a WFA student. Would you agree or not? How many of you have taken a wilderness first aid class somewhere along the way? In 16 hours of a wilderness first aid class, I have one goal. That goal is to take people with no medical background whatsoever and give them a system to make decisions about who they can take care of in a backcountry setting and who needs to evacuate to definitive care. That's the goal of my 16-hour class. Those students might be 16-year-old camp students that are here only because Camp Runamuck decided that they wanted to have wilderness first aid training for everyone. They might be a bunch of recreationalists who sign up at an REI store because they've now retired from their full-time job and they're thinking they want to go out and play in the backcountry all by themselves. And diabetes means very different things to those people. But in the context that I have them, 16 hours wilderness first aid class, the end goal is make good evacuation decisions. I'll change my diabetes class. On a WFA level, my diabetes class is actually a smaller subset of a larger class. And it gets covered like this. Anytime I have a patient who's got an altered mental status and diabetes is even a possibility, I will give that patient sugar. If that altered mental status persists, we will evacuate that patient. 2 sentences, way simpler. Same underlying core. They need to know a little bit about what the problem was related to. They got a sugar piece in there. They needed to know what evac guidelines they had to work with. Altered mental status that doesn't respond to whatever the treatment was, which in this case was sugar. I can tailor my class to any setting. I can decide, great, I know those 3 components. I've got a half an hour to kill. I'm going to go run a scenario. And I can teach it out of a scenario. Gosh, it's dumping rain. We've been doing scenarios all afternoon. Let's just go inside, bang that out in 3 sentences, and then take a break while people can get warm. We can apply these same principles to any of our field topics, to campsite selection, for example. I'm going to give you 3 minutes this time on campsite selection, and I'm going to tweak your audience so that we can actually hear how we would take those core components and change it slightly based on either course type, location, or student group. Sound like a good next phase?
You've got a great surface.
This time, when you give us your 3-sentence class on campsite selection, remind us who your audience was, so we can put it in that context. And presumably still get across our three core components of safety, impact, and comfort, but specific to whatever our target audience's needs or demands were. So this time, we'll go backwards this time. We made you go first last time, so team, who are you teaching and what?
We were teaching at a half-day workshop for a third grade class. And we said, when you are ready to camp, look up, down, and around for anything that could hurt you. Next, look for flat ground that has dirt or flat rocks and is big enough for everyone's tent. You want to be 200 steps from water, but not too far.
I feel so calm. It feels like I should take a nap now. Do we get juice boxes?
We'll have some juice boxes for you, Drew. Did we hear our three message points in there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. All right, I like it. And then as a comparison, then, what next team? What was your target audience again?
Okay. Well, we didn't exactly come up with 3 specific sentences, which I could do. But yeah, we had an alumni sailing course this
Okay.
time. So, and maybe this is a very large assumption too, but hopefully they know something from their prior NOLS course about those 3. Hopefully they remember something from prior NOLS courses about those 3 areas. So we would remind them of that. These are 3 priorities in picking a safe campsite, and then at least my tendency would be to kind of open it up to them, like what, sailing specific, what are our primary considerations here at this area? Like safety of the boats, as Steve mentioned, is that's with sailing that transfers highly to personal safety, because if you wreck your boat, you're done. And then, and I don't know, talking in circles here, I feel like, but, yeah, and then hopefully as alumni, they can, brainstorm and come up with some safe and less impact campsites on their own.
And where I would push you, and it may be that our next group gives us some of these, is I would still push you to have your 3-sentence class, knowing that, as you said, our audience presumably has a background, as opposed to this first audience that had no background. And then you can choose the style once you got a feel for what it is that your students are actually bringing to the table. But if you don't know what your 3 sentences are, you're going to find yourself talking in circles, even with your students.
Right.
Well, what do you guys think? What do we think is? Where am I trying to go? What information do I want to have from them? Let's hear from this team back. I think you had the same grouping, right? It's an alumni sailing trip. What'd you come up with?
So we would like to say, remember to choose a campsite that minimizes exposure to potential hazards, takes L&T into consideration, and is comfortable. On this particular sailing course, a good campsite will provide anchorage in a sheltered harbor with a beach above high tide, with room for long walks on the beach.
So I'd say that the tips in there, that we were talking to an audience that had a background were the very first word of the very first sentence, which was what? Remember. So if we get into adult education theory, which we're not going to dwell on, acknowledging prior experience is a crucial component. So remember, and then we hit our 3 concepts, and then we got specific, and the other way you knew that they were coming with a different set of priorities was bocce ball. I like long walks on the beach, but bocce ball. All right, let's shift over here. What do we have from this team? What were your 3 sentences for which audience? Horsepacking seminar? Is that what we said? Horsepacking seminar?
Horseback.
I think I said the word seminar. That's all right. Never mind. Continue.
Sorry?
It's quite all right.
Plan your route to use established sites. And an established site will provide a safe and comfortable place for your horses, safe and comfortable place for your people, and is already impacted.
Okay, so acknowledging again our 3 components, but in the horse specific realm where we are more likely to need to focus on the impact side of things. Okay, very good. What did you guys have for the same group?
When choosing a campsite for horsepacking, the group must consider the people as well as the horses. People need to be protected from environmental hazards, including stampeding horses, and find a durable existing campsite. Horses need a confined area, ideally a quality pasture or the tie line chosen with LMT principles in mind.
All right, so same ideas, looking at those, the impact in particular and the extra safety hazards of dealing with large, potentially evil animals. Potential. All right, very good. And let's move up to our front two teams. What do you guys have?
We were talking about something called sea kayak.
None of us really knew what this was.
Amazing how that works.
Apparently they're kayaks that are funny shaped or something, but we said when choosing a campsite, look up, down, and around for hazards. Include falling objects and rising tides. Consider durable surfaces and your impact on other visitors. Your campsite is your home. It should be sheltered and accommodate your whole group and boats.
So you took the first three sentences and just added things that made, sounded like water. And I mean that as a compliment.
We really only added one word and we crossed another one out and replaced it with tides. Because we thought water might not be specific enough.
Excellent. Again, showing the versatility of the baseline principles. Even in the absence of experience, you can intentionally get where you want to go. I'll give you credit for that. Very good. This team up here, I tried to set it up, I missed. They did have one boater. So what'd you come up with the inside scoop?
When sea kayaking, you want to make sure that you are able to take your boats out of the water and put them back in with relative ease, and also camp above the high tide line. You want to avoid impacting animals and plants on the land, the sea, and the intertidal zone, and make sure you have access to fresh water. And you also want to stay comfortable. You want to avoid sharp rocks and bountiful sand.
To avoid bountiful sand?
Oh yeah, it's gross.
Very good. I'm just making sure that I got my comfort factor down. I agree. Good. So again, taking this activity, taking this baseline concept of if I can start from whatever the kernel is, the nugget, that's going to be my structure. I can build on that to meet whatever the needs are of the audience, as we just varied there. The location also varied in there. The style, I made reference to this, but this might be the class that has to occur in the tent because suddenly it's dumping rain and we know we've got to cover something. So instead of doing my flake my rope out to teach tidal activity based on lunar paths I've got to do something out in a tent. And if I know what my three core components are, I can do it in the tent. And ultimately, that bottom line there, that's what I encourage new instructors to work with when they are planning their lessons ahead of time. You need to identify the need to know information. What has to be there? Because that's got to be the core of any presentation. Then as I have either more time, more familiarity, or just more comfort with the material, I can start getting into the things like what's helpful to know to make that topic more understandable. It's helpful to know the relation of the pancreas to glucose regulation. It's not need to know. You can take care of a diabetic person just fine if you have no idea where the pancreas is other than in here somewhere. Moving beyond that, what's fun to know? It's fun to know that you can't really have a hypoglycemic diabetic emergency unless somebody's injected themselves with insulin. That's fun to know. Is it important? Nah. Is it helpful? Nah. Really, what do I need to know? Who has to stay and who can stay? Who has to stay? Who must stay on this? Who can stay and who has to leave? But it requires that level of reflection about any topic. If I've thought about it with enough structure, I am then free to improvise around all of these other factors. People have this intrinsic, in the NOLS community, we have this intrinsic resistance to anybody saying, no, here's what has to be taught, because we confuse it with here's how something has to be taught. And I would encourage you to think critically about that. I spent some time professionally in arguably the most improvisational of businesses. I worked in improvisational comedy. And I can tell you without a doubt that there's more structure that goes into any successful improvisational comedy act than anybody's aware of. Because if you don't have the framework upon which to rest whatever it is that's your final product, that final product has no direction, and it won't be successful. So in our quest to be an intentional educator, we can take this tool and apply it to a broader context of how do we make ourselves intentionally good outdoor educators. You buying in so far?
Yeah, but I've always looked at it a little differently.
Sure.
I start out by what can I reasonably expect students to remember in
Mhm.
this class, and focus it on that. I tell them that at the beginning.
Yep.
You, depending on how much time you've got and interest, you work with it as much as you want, and then remind them of the important points at the end.
And I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying is
sentences. It's a little different view on that, but it works the same.
exactly. And the underlying core, it's got to be easy to remember, it's got to be applicable, and it's got to be something that I can present in a wide range of formats to meet the needs of my students. One of the things that I hope we're going to walk away from this exercise with is not that there are the 3 correct sentences for any class. That's not the point. Nowhere along the way did we say, that one was good, that one was lousy. But rather, that we need to be looking at any topic with that level of intentional approach. Can I take whatever this topic is and boil it down to what seem to be the 3 key components? And then I can tweak it out as need be based on these other variables. But if I can't start from that core nugget piece, it's not going to be useful to come up with some other convoluted lesson plan. I don't have a path where I'm going to. Yesterday, a lot of people were using this analogy about cooking. Everybody who sat in on the leadership discussion at lunchtime yesterday, there were all these analogies about cooking and ingredients and this, that, and the other. And everybody ignored the fact that you need to identify the dish. Right? If we haven't identified the dish, having all the ingredients in the world doesn't matter. We've got to know what it is we're trying to make. So if we can get at that core component, then we can approach teaching not just to set up our class well, but to set up the entire educational process well. And I think that's where Shana's going to take us next. How does this tool fit into the larger picture? True?
True.
True.
I mean, you stole half my thunder. That's all right.
I'm thunderous.
You still have your lightning.
Ooh, good one. So bright. And if y'all want to move back, move back.
Yeah, I mean, you sound surprised that James talked too much.
15 years, Drew. Really long time. Okay. So this is, at some level, paraphrasing what Gates has been alluding to, but it gives people some language to really anchor on when they're trying to have a conversation with somebody about teaching, how they're approaching teaching, how they're approaching a topic. We use this a lot at WMI. We talk about style versus curriculum. And this has been a pretty long evolutionary process for us to try and figure out how we can separate those two things. In principle, curriculum is fixed. Doesn't mean it doesn't evolve and change over time, but it is fixed. We want students, regardless of how we interact with them and what length of course and what context they will apply this information in, to get the same pieces of information. Those same core principles that we just worked on, whether it was for camp hygiene or water disinfection or campsite selection. We found those common core principles. The style of delivery is variable. And you as an educator are expected to be able to understand what stylistic options are available for you to deliver this curriculum, what style is going to work best for the particular audience or the context in which you're teaching, have the ability to vary your style based on the comprehension of your group. So people get pretty hung up on this idea that if we fix our curriculum, we start to create recipes, and people have to follow the recipes in order, or they will not be successful or not meet expectations in doing their job. And in my mind, it's exactly the opposite. I have huge freedom in knowing that here are the fundamental principles I need to tell every student of mine about fill in the blank topic, right? But I have given a complete open door to choose my stylistic approach, to use my talents as an educator, to use my creativity as an educator to find the right way to do that. So this is the whole instructor, there is freedom, all right? If you, as an instructor, wonder what the curriculum is, I think as a school, we have a lot of resources available to us, but this is a place where we could perhaps tighten things up as well. When I'm in the field, I have my course leader. When I'm in town, I have my program supervisor, or access to the curriculum manager, or research publications, or the LEN, or the WEN, I can't remember what it's called now, the WEN, the LEN, all those notebooks. But I have a lot of places I can go to try and find curriculum. But I do need to understand what it is that I'm expected to convey, and to be consistent in my messaging for every course that I teach. One day I may dress up in funny hats to do it, and the other day I may stand in front of a board and lecture. It doesn't matter. The core principles are the same. When we provide instructor evaluations in the WMI world, we evaluate people on both of these aspects of their teaching. We specifically evaluate them on whether they met the curricular objectives and covered all the required information. That's where we provide the bulk of our feedback, because it's much easier to be objective about whether I hit all of the evacuation criteria for somebody's abdominal pain than whether their skit actually worked for me as an audience member. So we provide a lot less feedback on the stylistic side and a lot more feedback on the curricular side. And if you're having a hard time with people being open and receptive to feedback, ask yourself, are you giving them feedback that's about what they taught, or are you giving them feedback about how they taught? That's not to say that there's not valuable stylistic feedback, you know, the classic, like, you set the students up so they're all looking into the sun, then they didn't pay attention, they didn't look at you. You know, that's a bit of a stylistic choice, and that's valuable feedback. But it's probably more important for them to understand that they missed two of the critical objectives of whatever topic it was that they're teaching. And if you can deliver that information to them in this way, I think people are much more receptive to feedback, and it's much more helpful to them to figure out, did you just not like the way I dressed for this class, or did I really not convey the information I needed to convey? Okay? The other piece of feedback you have on this is your student performance. If you go off and your students do an activity and you facilitate that activity, you debrief it, they go off and they apply those skills and they're all over the place, that's pretty direct feedback that perhaps your curriculum wasn't clear, wasn't concise, wasn't principle-based. Or maybe you, in your own mind, hadn't really figured out what are those core components that I intended to deliver. Right? That idea makes sense for folks? Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes left, and we wanted to sort of figure out how to help people translate what we did for the last 90 minutes into what you can do the next time you put a paddle in your hand, put a pack on your back, or stand up in front of a whiteboard, or whatever your teaching medium is. How do you take this idea and how do you use it on a daily basis? Because I think this is a concept that we can use every single day. All right. So the first thing I'd say is challenge yourself. Okay? Challenge yourself to wade through the massive information that you know. We argue, and we believe really strongly, that it is much, much harder to teach in the short course format than it is to teach in the long course format. If I give Gates 30 days to teach an EMT course, he can ramble, and next Tuesday he'll make up the time. When you're in a 16-hour format, that 10 minutes that you've gone over on your lightning talk is critical, and you shortchange and sacrifice your students from getting other information. So I challenge you, the next time that you're teaching, to really think about how do I distill my whatever topic it is into those 3 core criteria, and I back plan. So do it for yourself. Challenge yourself. Think about using this in terms of mentoring new instructors or mentoring experienced instructors. It doesn't matter. How many of us have a notebook that we carry in the field, and you go and you pull out your weather class and you're like, I remember that in 1991, Lori Rose taught that weather class on my IC, and I've carried it with me diligently for the last however many years that is. It's a little weathered around the edges, but I have such fond memories. And what do? I learn to teach by parroting other people's teaching. right? We've done that a lot. We see a great class, we take notes. And when we go to teach that class, we simply mimic what somebody else did. And we never take the opportunity to step back and say, what's really the point of this class? What are those applicable concepts that somebody needs to know? So when I'm in the field and I'm working with another instructor or I'm working with a new WMI instructor, that's my question. It's like, great, you got 5 pages of notes for this 30-minute shock class. Goodness. Teach me your shock class in 3 sentences. And they start to ramble, and we get to 10 sentences and 15 and 20 sentences. Like, okay, time out. 3 sentences. And you eventually get them to kind of see through all this extra nice to know, fun to know kind of stuff to get them back to the principles. It's an incredibly effective tool to mentor somebody. And if you start with the 3-sentence concept or the 3-principle concept, whatever you want to call it, and then you let them add back in all that extra information, it grounds them. And it comes back to what you're saying, Dave. It's like, okay, I'm going to start with the 3 most important principles, and at some point in the middle I might emphasize them, and then I'm going to conclude with them, and then I'm going to go run an activity, and I'm going to debrief that activity by anchoring on these 3 principles. If I know what they are, I'm going to have consistency of message. But it's really hard for people to do that. We believe that the hallmark of a really good educator is that they can teach anything in 3 sentences, because it's really easy to teach stuff in 60 minutes. I can fill time with all kinds of information or misinformation, but it's really hard to teach in 3 sentences. And so I feel like I've achieved my educational success when I can take that topic and I can do the 3-sentence, the 5-minute, the 20-minute, or the 60-minute version at a drop of a hat, and they all revolve around understanding my core of what I want to say. All right, so use this as a tool on your next course with your co-instructor as you're helping them prepare whatever class they're teaching. Get them to distill it down into those 3 sentences. Consider using this to structure your debriefs. All right, so you teach people navigation skills, you send your students off, you hike with them, but you're kind of quiet for that day. You're letting them make their mistakes. They go off, they walk a mile the wrong way. And eventually get to camp, they're cold, tired, and hungry, and you want to debrief them. Well, think about, what did you teach them in class? What did you observe in their activity for that day? And how can you help reinforce that experience to become a useful lesson? And use these ideas that you have some common principles and anchor your debriefs around those ideas. All right? So pretty simple ways to think about applying this concept. And that's not to say, as Kat was talking to us, that 3 is the only number you can use. We like 3. It's a simple number. Most people can count to 3. I can remember 3 things at one time. If it's 4, if it's 2, it doesn't really matter. But the idea is understand the fundamental and turn around and use it and teach your students this vernacular, teach your peers this vernacular, and then you all have a common language and a common approach to how information is shared between you. So, for your homework?
So I have homework for you. Day after tomorrow, many of you will be heading back to wherever you came from. You're in the airport, you're at the bus stop, you're thumbing a ride, whatever it might be. Somebody comes up to you and sees your NOLS logo and says, NOLS, National Outdoor Leadership School. Teach me leadership in 3 sentences. Send them to me. My email's easy to find. Send me your 3-sentence leadership class. Love to hear it. Love to read it. You don't have to do it now, it's homework. So you're like, oh, I need a month to do that. No.
So how would you teach this class in 3 sentences?
3 sentences on intentional teaching. The guys in the back want, do you just want me to do it into the camera? Is that what you're... Very good. The hallmark of an intentional educator is that they start by figuring out their end goal, identifying the core components of any class, and then they back plan to make that class appropriate to the audience, the subject matter, the location. If they've done this, they could teach any class in any context because they know their core message points. 3 sentences. Thanks for coming.